I'm so sorry for the technical difficulties. I'm Dr. Hess. We are still working on the presentation, and part of the dilemma is also part of what I'm known for, not necessarily dilemmas, but the fact that how I teach. I am a developmental psychologist, and I have been teaching for the last 40 plus years on something called DIR Floortime, which is a developmental relational approach towards the treatment of children, adolescents, and young adults who are impacted by autism spectrum disorder. How I teach is basically give you my clinical points, and then I have a very active center. It's called Center for the Developing Mind, located in Los Angeles, California. And with permission of our wonderful families, I generally show you clinical demonstrations of the points that I just made in lecture. So that's the part that we're having difficulty with. So I'm wondering, Marcus, if we could maybe take some questions from the audience while we are waiting to get started on this concept of DIR floor time. And meanwhile, behind the scenes, my folks are working diligently to hopefully bring us to the presentation.
Good. So first of all, I'm very happy to host Esther Hess today in our SEPI webinar about treating children impacted by autism using DIR, floor time, a developmental individual difference in the relationship-based approach. And it's very nice that Jeff Harris is organizing and was organizing this webinar for SEPI, and that SEPI is hosting this webinar today. And in order to start and bridge the technical solution, do you have any questions so far to Dr. Hess? Anything you would like to ask her in the beginning? We already heard that it's going to be a very interesting webinar with videos. And do you have any questions already before? And if you have any questions, please just write them in the chat for the moment.
Marcus, let me get started by saying that DIR floor time is a developmental relational approach that was created by my mentor, Dr. Stanley Greenspan, and his partner, Serena Weider. And I had the privilege many, many years ago to be one of his direct mentees and assisted in bringing the model over to the West Coast. I like to think of DIR floor time as what I call a great date, meaning that the greatest compliment that I can have when children come into my practice as a developmental psychologist is for children to say, "I don't want to leave your playroom." What does that actually mean? It means that during that hour-and-a-half experience, my children have had the ability to go ahead and to make sure that they have been heard. They've been emotionally validated. And so when you are with somebody who understands you, who you feel understands where you're coming from, whether you're having a very good day or, I like to say, sometimes a very bad hair day type of thing, what happens is that children understand that they are listened to and they have value. And at that point, now we can get them to do all the hard developmental relational work that they have to do to move forward. But the first thing is that we have to go ahead and we have to make them feel that coming to the facility during the, right after school is worthwhile. Then the next thing we need to do is we have to have a map. So a lot of times I will hear from my play clinicians, "Come on, Dr. Hess, why can't we just jump in and go ahead and play?" And the issue is, well, yes, of course, but we need to understand to whom are we playing to and what are the issues and how can we best tailor make the design of our intervention specific both to the child as well as to the child's family, because I've yet to meet the child who lives alone. So part of the discussion is we're going to be talking about D, which is for development. And we have, in other words, not necessarily where the child is chronologically, but where they are developmentally. So I had to close my eyes and look at a child who has some, autism spectrum disorder. Typically, those children often feel much younger than their chronological age. So if I address the child, come on, be big because you're 7, and today they're having that bad hair day, as I mentioned, and they're only about 4, then I have to modify my approach to be closer to 4. And then I have to understand the individual neurological differences that created that lag in development. And then I have to use R, which is my relationship to the child's relationship to the world. In other words, do I have a child who is hyper reactive to environmental stimulus, or hypo-reactive, or a little bit of both, a mixed profile? And then I have to use my talents, because I am the Pied Piper, to move that child forward. And it is through my relationship with a child that we have the potential for making what I like to call a great date, which is the ability to woo that child into the potential for an interaction. And we know that actually by making these interactions on a social emotional level, we actually change the way that the brain itself is building brain maps in terms of how the neurological receptors are reconnecting. I am I am just taking a second to hopefully move our technology forward. And okay. Do we have any, Marcus, do we have any questions while we're waiting?
We have the first question, yes, and it's, I wonder if there's an age range for the DRI technique. That's the question we've got.
It's a great question, and I'll tell you how I approached it. I initially, like many early interventionists, we started off with understanding that early intervention makes a difference. So I think the majority of the folks who were involved at the early stages of DIR Floortime started with a 0 to 5 population. And then, lo and behold, our children got older. We also realized that there was a tremendous lapse in service. As a matter of fact, I am probably one of the few clinicians who actually use Floortime actually throughout the lifespan of persons on the spectrum. And so the issue is that when we are working with young children, and I would say anywhere between 0 through early adolescence, then we're going to be using more toys, because play is the language of children. As we're getting into more advanced aging and levels of sophistication and capabilities, then we're going to actually do obviously more talk therapy. However, at all times, I'm still holding on to that mapping, where I'm thinking about the premise of what is the the basic developmental level of the person in front of me. What is the underlying individual neurological issues that might be holding down this lag, and what can I do in the context of my relationship with this individual, noting the sensitivities of this person to the world, that I can woo this child or individual or adult into the relationship. Actually, I have done now, one of our subspecialties at Center for the Developing Mind is later life diagnoses. It's not uncommon for me to have parents or grandparents even. I think the eldest person that I've diagnosed most recently was about 72. And that came about because they brought in the grandkids and they said, he's an awful lot like me. And and so I said, okay, let's explore that a little bit. So Floortime, if you understand the method behind the madness, so to speak, is a model of interconnectedness. And so you can do this throughout the lifespan for persons, obviously, with adapting to age-appropriate protocol. Great question.
Yeah, another question, if there's still time.
We're working with you. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So Darcel Lee wrote, "Hello, I'm so excited for this webinar. Thank you for presenting today. I'm especially curious about how to work with resistance. My 8-year-old responds with silence when I make an interpretation about their feelings, and wondering how to help them increase their verbalization."
Okay, I got part of that. I'm sorry, Marcus, you're going to have to repeat it. Something about it is
Okay.
one of the participants has an 8-year-old.
Yes, and my 8-year-old responds with silence when
So,
I make an interpretation about their feelings
okay,
and wondering how to help them increase their verbalization. So instead of letting it in the silence, starting to get verbalization.
sure.
Mhm.
Okay, well, it's an excellent question. I don't know if, for example, um, your child has an alternative diagnosis. Let me share with you that the there are many categories that Floor Time works beautifully with, including a subcategory of children who are impacted by something called selective mutism. And I don't know your child, so I don't make a reference that that's exactly what's happening. But selective mutism is the most extreme form of social anxiety where children do not feel comfortable to speak except for with select persons in select settings. So they often are appearing, quite mute. Sometimes in families, sometimes not speaking to one parent, or every once in a while, most extreme cases to both parents. So what I do, and I use floor time effectively with this group, is I don't worry about language. What I do, and I think you're already interpreting what the emotional state of your son is, I think that's excellent. I focus on the relationship. And one of the fundamental principles of floor time is to play dumb. In other words, never to take no for an answer. So oftentimes to have an active interactive with children, I will go ahead and I will have um, a variety of I'll make mistakes, like the child say, okay, Dr. Hess, you stand, or point that I should stand to the left, and I will make a point to stand to the right. And then when they make a point of no, no, like you went to the wrong spot, I go, oh, I don't know what you're talking about. I can't, you have to help me. So I'm presuming language rather than asking for language in some sort of demand, because for whatever reason, and I don't know, again, the circumstances of your child at all, so you'll forgive me. But I'll go back to this one category of children. There is a neurological faulty interpretation of environment. So anytime that the body has an elevation of vascular experience, where the heartbeat goes a little faster, that could be excitement, that could be pain, that could be joy, that could be sadness. It could be a lot of different variety of definitions. But for the child, they interpret it as dangerous and they shut down verbally. So again, I not knowing your child at all, I never make any kind of diagnoses with, in the blind. But what I do with the children who I do diagnose with selective mutism is I work on saying, I'm just so happy you're here. And if they do any kind of nonverbal gesturing, head shaking, pointing, I presume speech. Well, thanks for letting me know. That's so great. And so my affect becomes a little bit larger and more encompassing. But if you do have a concern, and I don't know how long lasting the silence of your child has been, I would get him or her evaluated. I believe you said it's your son. And just to make sure, first off, um, I always do make sure that there are no medical issues that are underlying what presents as we think as behavioral issues, because I sometimes both medical as well as neurological issues mimic psychiatric behaviors. And so I want to make sure that a child has had a very good and thorough review with a pediatrician to make sure that there isn't anything that we are presuming is psychiatric when actually can be treated or needs to be treated in a far more definitive medical fashion. Marcus, we're still working hard behind the scenes, and I appreciate everybody's patience. And I'm grateful for any more questions.
There's another question.
What's a connection?
What is
the email that connects?
Okay, the email look under Harris. The last name.
That's what I did. I put Jeff.
Jeff Harris.
I put Harris. Because it was 62.
Yes.
It's not coming up. It's coming up on your phone, but there is no link. It's just.
We're looking now. Now we're looking for the Zoom link. Oh my goodness! Is this a Peter principle? If anything bad could happen with technology, it happened today.
Can I send the? But it doesn't help if I send the Zoom link in this
You want
chat.
to send it right now?
Can you send it?
Because it'll be on top.
Okay, if you could send it to him right now, another Zoom link, that'll be right on top, and hopefully we'll be able to open up that one.
On the chat. I'll just...
Okay. All right, I'm happy that we're working together as a team. And by the way, folks, this is reminiscent of what happens when you deal in real life with kids, that, you know, you have the best made plans, and sometimes you know, there's a part of your team that doesn't necessarily work as correct as it could have, and you have to be pivoting. And during, for example, the last 2 years of the pandemic, I think that characterizes those people who were able to thrive and move forward, including our children. Were able to pivot, and a lot of the kids, unfortunately, have not been able to do that. And I think that's part of the dilemma that we're seeing in terms of so many of our children who are suffering over the last couple of years of social isolation. Marcus, do we have any additional questions? And thank you for resending that Zoom. Okay, so if you have sent that Zoom link again, appreciate it. Thank you. And
I send it in the chat. Shall I send it via email again?
Please send it by email.
Okay.
Doctors for Autism?
Yes, the Doctor for Autism.
Okay.
Doctor for Autism website, please. Thank you.
Let me... I'll read you the...
Why don't you read me the next question? I'll answer that, and then you can send that chat. Yeah,
yes, let's do it like that.
Great. Okay.
I would like to know if you would be talking about the FEAS evaluation. It is regularly used in my workspace, Israel, and I would like to hear your approach of how to use it in the most efficient way.
Okay. I'm happy to hear that you've traveled virtually from Israel to join us for me it's this morning, but for you I know it's this evening. I have actually spoken multiple times for Elut, which is the Autism Society of Israel, and it is one of my favorite places on earth, so welcome. The FEAS is a way to assess both the strengths of the children individually, the strength of the care person individually, and then how they are as a dyad. And so how I use it most effectively, a child is, and his or her care person is presented with 3 different types of toys: tactile toys, vestibular movement toys, symbolic toys, and you're watching to see how, and it's gauged for generally between the ages of 7 and 48 months. And not in today's presentation because it's only an hour and a half, but I do give longer full day lectures and multiple day lectures where I actually show some wonderful footage of how I use the FEAS in session. Basically, you want to go ahead and assess how well with these different categories of toys do the partnership work. Okay, can they extend different ideas, for example, in symbolic play, so that you have a beginning, middle, and end to a story? Are we seeing, for example, children who are falling out of interactions because we need to have a continuity of back and forth as much as possible as a consequence of the fact that there might be some visual spatial distortions, vestibular problems, and so on. And so you recognize this through the different items of play, and we have a system where we're marking to see how well families work together with their children. I will tell you an interesting story. I was doing the FEAS not too long ago, and I had a father who actually showed up in a 3-piece suit, very, very sharply well-dressed gentleman, and we started putting out the toys. And with the right hand, the toys went out, and with the left hand, I noticed he began to put the toys away. And so what was so interesting was for him, when the toys were sort of displayed, it created a lot of anxiety. He said it made him feel like there's too much mess going on around him. That was happening at home, and what we realized was that he was unconsciously thwarting any kind of ability to actually connect with the child through the play because he couldn't tolerate anything that was disorganized. He was interpreting as messy. So actually, even prior to going ahead and doing any further work with the child himself, we had to get the dad into immediate therapy to work on his anxiety so he would be more available for us to do work together. Ladies and gentlemen, I think I don't want to, yeah, I don't want to jinx us, but I think we're actually online. You've been wonderful to wait the amount of time that we've been doing. Marcus, thank you so much. I think we're really ready to go.
You're welcome.
Without further ado.
Yes, so I think we can start with the presentation, and whenever there's a question.
And ladies and gentlemen, I'll try to go as fast as I can. We still have the hour and a half, but I had the time, if you do, to extend it a little bit longer to make up for the time that we missed today. I thank you, Marcus, so much so being able to help coordinate this, and for all those who were able to ask the questions so that we could use up the time and my tech folks could work behind the scenes. And thank you, Vic and Alan, tremendously for working behind the scenes to get us up and running. Okay.
If there's a question, I just switch on my video so that you know that there is a question, and if you want, you then can have the question right up.
Is there one more question? Sure, I will. No. Let's go ahead. Let's hear the question really quick, and I may be answering that in the context of our lecture.
No, whenever there's a question, there's no question at the moment, but just whenever there's a question, I'll be just switching on my video so that you know that there is a question, and then you can give me the time. All right.
That's fine. I appreciate that. So let me share with you. Today we're talking about treating children impacted by autism using DIR Floortime, as I've been mentioning, a developmental, individual, difference, and relational-based approach. And today we're going to be talking about the concept of brain plasticity, what we used to do with children, and this is maybe, I don't know, 70 to 80, 90 years ago when they were first diagnosed as having some kind of developmental delay, and then the emergence of the DIR model. And all through our time this morning, we're going to be talking about the strategy of DIR and specifically floor time. Next, please.
You see it?
Yeah, I do. So, in contrast to what we used to think, maybe, again, 70, 80, 90 years ago, if somebody was born with some kind of brain damage, either by birth or because of an accident, unfortunately, we used to say, see you, Charlie. Sorry, we cannot help you. But we know that actually is not accurate. The most up-to-date information in terms of brain development is the fact that the brain is far more adaptable, and that adaptability is actually called brain plasticity. Now, if somebody is born with the area of the brain damaged, it generally does not come back. However, other portions of the brain take over in terms of creating new neuronal connections. And as a consequence of that, you have the ability to actually regrow and create new brain mapping. One of the reasons I like DIR floor time so much is because it promotes through the emotional developmental levels the creation of these new brain maps. Now, how it works is actually the brain system is made up of many neuronal pathways or neurons that connect to one another by masses called synapses. And they release something called presynaptic neurons, which in turn release in the brain chemicals specifically called neurotransmitters, which have various names. And in my full day presentations, you hear me talk very specifically about neurotransmitters. But for our purposes today, you understand that this process happens repeatedly again and again and again in the creation of new neuronal mapping. So the next, please. And so we were talking about what happened, decades ago when children were initially diagnosed with some form of developmental delay. Unfortunately, what used to happen is that pediatricians, in an all honest assessment of what was happening, simply said to their parents, folks, I'm sorry, I suggest you institutionalize and walk away. And unfortunately, many people did. However, in 1987, there was a therapeutic breakthrough on the part of Dr. Ivor Lovaas. He was a student of B.F. Skinner, himself a behaviorist, most closely associated with ABA, Applied Behavior Analysis Systems. Dr. Lovaas made a startling announcement in this 1987 paper. He said, we don't have to institutionalize children with developmental delays. Now, educators got very excited. They said, well, all right, what are you going to do about the behaviors that are so worrisome, the aggressive behaviors, the withdrawing behaviors? And Dr. Lovaas says we can treat those. We can treat those in the lab, and we can go ahead and we can help modify these very disturbing and intrusive behaviors. So our educators got excited, and in the lab, they said, we're going to work with this. They would bring in a neurotypically developing child, say about 4 years old, and they would teach this child how to stack blocks. Okay. Then they would bring in the atypically developing child. And after a few moments of support and scaffolding, the child with the developmental delay would slowly learn how to mimic the behaviors of the typical child, and he or she also would stack blocks. All well and good, except not. And the behaviors were the first to recognize, as well as what the children were doing in session. The dilemma was that they couldn't generalize this model and push it into their real worlds. So my mentor, Dr. Stanley Greenspan, and his partner Serena Weeder, they came up with a different model. DIR Floortime, a developmental relational approach that takes in consideration all the underpinnings of the child from a holistic format, and actually with this particular intervention changes the way a child's brain actually addresses emotional, social, and academic dilemmas. We're going to go now with showing you a short film from our colleagues at York University in Canada. Here we're going to see a demonstration of how DIR floor time shows us the power of play to change the way the brain works.
It's been described as a breakthrough treatment for children with autism. But until now, the power of play has never been put to a rigorous scientific test.
What we wanted to know when we looked at this, when we created this institute to study this, is first of all, what's going on in the brain? What's going on with that social brain network? Can we actually bring that social brain network online? Can we get it cooking? Can we get these connections forming? All children have this drive to want to interact socially. It's the essence of being human. But for the child with autism, there are biological challenges that make interaction painful, that make it unpleasant. So if we can figure out what those factors are and then reduce the unpleasantness, reduce the stresses, then the child will in fact naturally want to do this.
To test that theory, Shankar and his colleagues recruited 51 families with children aged 2 to 5 with moderate to severe autism.
The possibility of bringing the child into our social world so that the child becomes an active social agent, not a child who responds because we've conditioned him or trained him to respond, but a child who interacts because he wants to, because it's fun. And it's through that process that he will learn meaningful language, that he will learn social skills, that he will develop empathy for others because he will understand things like facial expressions, gestures, and so on.
Is that in this other area called the amygdala, which processes emotions like fear and anxiety, before treatment, this area was very, very, very active. It was bright, very brightly lit up. After treatment, we could see that it was about half as bright. Ready, steady, and go.
Tristan's brain has actually rewired. The amygdala, the part that caused him to be anxious and hyper, has calmed down.
Okay, this is the frontal lobe. These are the...
And the parts that help him tune in to social cues like people's expressions are now active. It's as if Tristan's social brain suddenly woke up. And remarkably, Stephen found most of the children in the study had similar changes to their brains.
So we're actually looking at how the brain changes. So what's the impact in the real world? As I mentioned, both Greenspan and Dr. Weeder said that children are not just simply actions, they're interactions. So if we acknowledge that we're all born with biologically based individual neurological differences, and these differences impact family, community, culture, which in turn impacts how a child and caregiver get along. What Dr. Greenspan asked us to do was to realize, for example, that we all learn in our own unique individual ways. Now, for example, I personally am a visual learner, and I love the movies. So I'm going to show you my favorite film. Next, please. This is The Wizard of Oz, and it is absolutely my favorite film in the whole wide world. And like most of you, I've seen it about 75 times. And that's going to be wonderful. You said, oh, I joined SEPI just to listen to Wizard of Oz today. And that's not exactly true. But you're going to ask me, Dr. Hess, how is the Wizard of Oz going to teach us about autism? And the answer is this. If you remember in the opening part of the movie, Dorothy's house has fallen from the skies of Kansas. For those of you who are international, I highly recommend you see this movie. But a part of the United States has a lot of tornadoes, and it has picked up the house that Dorothy, the little girl, is in, and it has fallen through the winds and landed in the land of Munchkin. And she has killed with her house, she has squashed the wicked witch of the East. So you look around and you see a lot of greenery, but no children. Where are the children? And they're hiding. They're hiding behind the trees, behind the bushes. Why? Because they don't know if Dorothy, the little girl in the house, is she a good witch or a bad witch? Because that's the only people who really are operating in the land of Oz. And then suddenly there is a very good witch, Glenda, the good mommy, and she comes down in this beautiful bubble. And she lands and she does what good mommies do. She uses her voice, her presence, her intonation to do what mommies do, to assure the child that everything is okay, that Dorothy is actually just a little girl. Now, of course, it's Hollywood. So as she asks the children to come out, she needs to sing to reassure. Come out wherever you are, and meet the young lady who fell from the star. What's the message? It's perfectly fine to come on out. The question is, though, I'll go to the next slide, please. What if there were underlying individual neurological differences that prevented you from understanding your primary care person's message? How do you think you would feel? We don't have bad children, ladies and gentlemen. We don't have evil children by any means. We have scared children. We have anxious children. We have children who, for whatever reason, cannot interpret correctly the environmental cueing, the appropriate messages from their primary care person, so the world does not make sense. And some of these interfering agents include sensory modulation, which includes tactile, sound, vestibular, proprioceptive, olfactory, taste, pain, and sight. Additionally, we have children who are hyper-reactive in the world. They react for what appears to be a fairly innocuous reason, like on a dime. I call them my rocket ship guys. Conversely, I have children who need a lot of impact in their system to know where they are in space and time. These are my Gumby guys, who sometimes you'll see them in class, and they will be the kids who are barreling into other kids' blocks and structures, not because they're bad kids, but because they need that pow, that impact of hearing the other classmate cry when their blocks come tumbling down, because their system is so deprived of appropriate input to let them know where they are in space and time. And then, of course, I have something called a mixed profile. I have children who are both hyper and hyposensitive, depending on the medium that they have to navigate. And it really drives teachers and parents crazy, because they don't know how to present stimulus to a child in an operational and proficient way. I have other children who have auditory processing issues. It's not that they can't hear. It's like being on a bad cell phone. So as an example, this morning, prior to setting up, I was going ahead and I was making my calls as I do. I do a daily walk with Elsa, our therapy dog, from our center, and I hit a bad cell zone. Now, I should have said, I gotta call you back. I hit a small cell zone, but I said to my puppy, I said, okay, Elsa, let's go really fast, right? I want to scoot out of this cell zone, because I know what a good cell line sounds like, and I'll get it in a moment, right? But I would ask us all as a community of educators, what happens if you've never been on a good cell line in your life, and all you know is a cell phone, so to speak, with all kinds of distortions? And then the bigger question is, how much learning could possibly go on under these conditions? Visual spatial processing is when you become visually overwhelmed by the environmental experience. So, perfect example. In the United States, we recently celebrated Halloween a couple months back in October. So maybe probably a week and a half before the actual holiday, I had a wonderful teacher. I've got great teachers. I go into schools as part of my evaluations of my children probably every 10 days. So I have really good relationships with my families, hopefully, certainly, but also with my educators. I had this wonderful educator who took her own time and money and effort. She went to the local craft store and she decorated her preschool room with all different kinds of ghosts and goblins hanging from the ceilings, and it was just a Hollywood extravaganza. And it was all well and good unless you were autistic. And she called me up and she says, Dr. Hess, I have 2 little boys who will not walk into my classroom at all. So I can't yell at her and I can't, say, hey, don't you understand about visual spatial distortion? What I said to her, because I said, we got to work like a team, much, much closer. So I explained to her what visual spatial distortion can create in children, the kind of anxiety it can provoke, because visually children aren't making sense of, so to speak, the stop signs of life. And so we helped each other. I helped her come. I went into the classroom, and instead of making this ghosty room, we pushed everything sort of to pockets and we made ghosty corners. And as the children finished their stations, if they chose, they could go ahead and they could go into the ghosty sections and get, scared and all that kind of really fun stuff, Halloween-esque time. But at the same time, if it was overwhelming to them, they could choose not to go in. And that creates choice, and choice is very powerful for children. Now, motor planning and sequencing, that's the ability to go from point A to point B to point C. Let's go to the next slide. What do you do if you need to go from point A to point B to point C and you hit a roadblock in life? So, for example, I was walking with my dog this morning and there was some construction going on, and because I know how to navigate left and right, I can pivot, I was able to turn to the left, go down a different street, continue, resume my path once I got around the obstacle. But the problem is, for our kids on the spectrum, when they have to make a transition, when they hit life's roadblocks, oftentimes you see the deer in the headlight kind of expression. They don't know what to do and they're frozen in time. I've had many kids who, for example, will not do well in an exam, not because they don't have that information, but because they don't understand the question. And so they hit an obstacle. Now, most of us would ask the teacher, could I have another explanation, please? I don't understand what you want from me. Our kids get frozen in time and they don't ask the question. And so the teacher presumes, I guess you don't know the answer, when nothing could be further from the truth, but they don't know how to overcome and walk around that roadblock. So what does this all look like in the classroom? I'm going to show you a short scene from an actual classroom that I came and observed a while back. Next, please. The time of the year is just past, actually, just about a week shy of Thanksgiving. And, I'm in Los Angeles and people always tease. I said, well, you live in the tropics, right? That's why everybody wears shorts all the time. And that's not exactly true. Generally, we do, clothe our children appropriately, long pants and long shirts in December or November. However, it didn't matter for this particular child that we're watching in the scene. He's 4.5 years old. He has both a comorbid diagnosis of high-functioning autism as well as ADHD. About 75% of our children on the spectrum also have a comorbid diagnosis. Often it's ADHD, but it can also include tic disorder. Hold on, can you give me 1 minute? Okay, I'm just giving a little more of an intro. Oh, no, go back. Yeah. We're going to go back to our friend. Okay, there we go. So what happened was every day his mom would dress him a certain way, and then and he would take off his clothes and he would stuff it into his cubby, as you see him doing this right now, and he would put on the same outfit every single day. Shorts, shirt, tight fisticuffs, ready to play tennis, no matter the weather. Now, you could say it's a fashion statement, maybe, but for me it was a flag. Maybe something else is going on. Now, it could be the texture of the clothing is irritating him, so we have some kind of tactile defensiveness happening. It could be that he needs to have sameness, so he has to wear the same thing over and over again. But it's not a definitive diagnosis, it is a question mark. Now, I bring it up as a question mark because we often have to decide whether something is pathological. For me, pathology means how much does it interfere in somebody's life. Now, if I were to go, for example, to the Gap or a Baby Gap store, I would not see a shirt that has a tag in the back because it's irritating for a lot of people. And so that, marketing division has chosen not to put the actual tag in the back of a shirt. They stamp the sizes in their shirts. They're not marketing to the autistic population. It's not large enough for them. What they are acknowledging is that a lot of people have sensory issues, or they're sensory sensitive. So our job is to look at this young man and determine, are we just looking at sensory sensitivities, or are these flags, these question marks on our minds, are they indicating something perhaps a bit more serious? So you're going to see me go ahead and silently watch this child maneuver in his 4.5-year-old preschool class. This was a day that everybody was learning the ABCs. The assignment had been to bring from home something that started with the letter H, M, or B, to put it in your cubby. And at one point you'll see in circle time, the teacher will say, go to your cubby and retrieve that item, and then let's share it together. 3-point instructions should be relatively simple. The time of the year, as I said, is November. The child has been in class since August, so they've been in class for about 8 weeks. Let's see how he fares.
Joy, come on this side, please. Micah Mason, go back where you were, and Alice, go back where you were.
You know what? I don't want Micah to sit with her.
You know what, Alex? I heard people's feelings. Please tell them that. Chantel on Fridays.
Okay, I'm going to stop for a second, please.
Tomorrow you guys are not coming.
Please, can you stop the film, please? Thank you so much. It was very subtle, but I don't know if you noticed. At one point, these children were saying, I don't want to sit next to him. Oh, he's yucky. And I didn't hear the teacher say anything. I stopped this film at this point because the issue is that our children often on the spectrum are not well liked. And as a consequence, they are often bullied. And I urge schools all over the country to intervene at the age of 4, because at 14, for example, it's much more difficult to make your point. So here's a child who is victimized, potentially, not well liked. And could that also be contributing to what we are going to see in terms of his general delay and inhibition in this classroom setting? Let's continue to take a look.
Is next week. So, would you please raise your hand if you brought Chantel item or something that begins with H, M, or B?
I got Insta.
Okay, let's. People are raising their hands. Go that you stop. You didn't bring one? We will help you find something. Headband because
I only have these pictures.
it was
I only
H,
have
M, or B.
pictures. I only have pictures. That's not my cubby.
Okay.
You
H,
didn't
M, or
change
B.
your headband. Yeah, you can change your headband. Mr. Julian.
Right.
Where's that? Where's my headband? Where's my flag?
Sit down with your toes.
I forgot. I didn't forget it. I brought forward. Yes, the thing that I did.
What did you bring? I forgot.
Yeah, but
Okay. So the last scene, you see my friend pretty lost. And what should have been an easy 3-point directional becomes an overwhelming task. There we go. Part of the dilemma is, first off, we have to look at strengths. You know, in addition to being the executive director at Center for the Developing Mind and the head of our mental health department, I also teach at the medical school at UCLA. And I'll tell you what I lecture to my pediatric residents, my medical students. I say, you know, I know we're going to figure out problems, but tell me a strength first about the child that you're going to be presenting. And I ask for the strength first because that's our entrance actually into intervention. That's the beginning of that great date that I mentioned, where a child feels valued. Now, in this case, I think this child has a lot of strengths. I think he's quiet and he's compliant. I think he is very much a visual learner. You notice how he's looking all over the place to his left and right. He's trying to follow the lead of his classmates. Now, it's interesting. I've coined a phrase. I call them soft souls. The other children in the classroom who are not bullies to our children, who actually embrace our children with need. These are the children who seek out our friends, and they actually help navigate the world for them. The soft souls are critically important because part of my script for my parents is to have play dates with these typical soft souls, probably 2 to 3 times a week, because I want my children to go ahead and learn from other children how to navigate in the social and emotional world. For example, if I see a child who's tantruming, I, as a kind adult, am going to go ahead and go, "Oh, John, honey, what's the matter?" But another child is going to go, "Johnny, get up, come on, let's go play." And he will. So these soft souls that are helping navigate are critical in terms of part of the repair for this child's brain mapping that we discovered. But we're also seeing that this child is lost, that somehow he has lost his spot from figuring out where he belongs. You know, he didn't know where he's supposed to sit even after 8 weeks of class, to where his cubby was when all his friends were around him. Now, in terms of processing, to me, he looks like he has what's called a processing delay. If you noticed, all the other kids raised their hand pretty quickly, and he did, but it was about a beat and a half late. I think that could potentially catch him up academically. He also didn't go near his friends as they were navigating, because I don't think he wanted to be touched, and I go back to his clothes. I think maybe he really does have some sensory issues going on. And so the reason why he wears the same thing every day is because he can tolerate it on his body. And a lot of kids, other kids cannot, you know, in terms of clothing. But what I would do to help him, because I think he is a visual learner, I would go ahead and I would paint his cubby a certain color or put his picture on the front so he wouldn't lose it. I might also have a textured square on the floor, which would be his permanent spot. So again, so he shouldn't be lost. These are occupational therapy tools that I've been taught by my wonderful occupational therapist at Center for the Developing Mind. Didn't come up in graduate school as a mental health practitioner, but it's helped me understand the child from the bottom up, so to speak. It's from both an interdisciplinary approach, but also an awareness that these individual neurological differences that we see as behaviors are really coming from a different place, and we have to help support those areas of concern. Let's go to the next slide, please. So as I mentioned, here's our job. We have to come up with a map. We have to create an understanding of D, the functional, emotional, developmental of the child, not his chronological age, but for example, this previous child, to me, even though he was 4.5 chronologically, he felt more about 3. So we have about a 1.5 year lag. I don't know why, but if I look at the individual neurological differences about this child, I think there's a lot of sensory issues going on. I'm guessing he might be hyper reactive to his environmental experiences. And there seems to be a hesitancy in his relationship with his peers. So my job in terms of R is to bridge the gap between himself and friends, for example, and use my affect to be the Pied Piper to pull him into the potential for a developmentally appropriate relationship. Next, please. When I'm thinking about in functional developmental capacities, I imagine a ladder that ascends into developmental heavens. And like any good ladder, what I want to do is make sure that the bottom rungs of my ladder are strong so that they can ascend into an ordered space where children can be the most complex in their thinking. So I have to have the ability for the individual to go ahead and focus and attend and engage and relate. I need simple two-way gesturing, both verbal and nonverbal, to be able to have good communication skills. And only then, when these bottom rungs are solid, I can get into complex problem solving, the use of creative ideas and symbols, and eventually into analytic and logical thinking. Next, please. When I'm thinking again about these first two rungs, the ability to focus and attend and engage and relate, who am I thinking about? I'm thinking about our primary care persons, typically mommies and daddies. And I want to show you this next lovely film. This is with a neurotypical developing 4.5-month-old. And again, it's really important if you're going to study atypical development to look at typical development. So here's this wonderful mommy with her little girl. And you're going to see this is the first time that this child is in my office. So she's kind of agitated. But I want you to notice how children, infants in this case, how they naturally self-soothe. Okay.
Okay. ¿Qué pasó?
Okay, stop, please. Thank you. All right. So this baby was agitated, lovely mommy. She was using her voice, her affect to help organize this child so she could become, even at 4.5 months, a complex thinker. So what children do is that they put their fingers in their mouth, or they use the bottle or the breast. They can close their eyes, they can go to sleep, gaze avert. But it got me to think, because I have a lot of occupational therapy rooms at Center for the Developing Mind, and my children used to come out, my 12-year-olds, for example, and they'd be chewing on their shirts or on necklaces or whatever. And I go back to this idea that a lot of times our kids get bullied. So I wasn't happy with what I was seeing coming out of our occupational therapy rooms, because I needed to find a more socially appropriate device that helped my children regulate, but also recognize the fact that they needed to be in the world. So I found these wonderful lollipops. They get nothing back from the company. It's called Yummy Earth. They happen to be delicious and gluten-free, low sugars, or natural sugars, I should say, and my parents love them. Now, the issue with the lollipops is it's okay to suck on a lollipop. Not so much okay to suck on your fingers when you're 12, right? But what this does is it recognizes, right, for my kiddos, that I understand you need to regulate in the world, and so this is a device to help you do that. But I just want you to do it in a way that will also help you be socially appropriate and not be targeted potentially for any kind of brutalization. Next, please. Simple two-way gesturing is what Dr. Greenspan would call the circles of communication. I compare it to the back and forth you might see in a psychic game of ping pong. Let's take a look. We have a very, very advanced toddler who's quite capable of ping pong. But what you're seeing, actually, jokes aside, is this lovely, lovely back and forth. The ability for children to sustain attention and stay in a back and forth relationship is the essence and basics of good learning. What we want is for children to have the capacity to sit and take this information in and have 50 or 60 back and forth as much as possible. The longer a child has the ability to sit, the greater their opportunity to learn. So sometimes we have to improve that before we can move on to anything else. Next, please. Complex problem solving, the creative use of ideas and symbols, analytic and logical thinking. These are all parts of the development of self. Now, we're going to take a look at a family. And we're going to see, how does the sense of self get developed when you also are dealing with a crisis? And as I said, it's really important to look at typical child development if you're going to study atypical development. In this case, we see a 10-year-old sister and her 4-year-old brother. Now, I happen to love 4-year-olds because I call them the definition of narcissism. Everything is about them, which is wonderful because they love life so much. Here's mommy. And as I mentioned, I go into schools every 10 days, but I also go into people's homes to do the assessment because I want to see children in what I imagine, not always, but most often, is their most comfortable space, because I want to see the contrast between school and then certainly when they come into my playroom. So in this case, I had made my reservation to see the family, probably a month before. And Mom had asked me to actually assess older sister. So the night before, I always call and I say, hey, just a reminder, I'm coming tomorrow night. And Mom said, listen, by the way, you're welcome, but by the way, the paternal grandmother just passed away that morning. So of course I offered to reschedule. And she says, you know what? No, I actually think maybe you come, because Grandma had been sick for a long, long time. She had not really been active in the children's life for many, many years. And so Mom did not necessarily think they would be so impacted, but she was kind of curious. So I did come. So here we are looking at typical child development, the development of the self, but we're also looking what's the impact in terms of the differences between a 10-year-old and a 4-year-old. And then you add life. And on top of life, here we have, for example, is the loss of a grandparent. And I ask you to consider, because this is what we're calling perhaps a post-pandemic experience now. I hesitate if you hear my voice, because I think we're still dealing obviously with a lot of concerns over variants and so on. But how are our children navigating with everything they all have to do? And by the way, life is imposing a pandemic. And how is that expressing itself with our children? So this has nothing to do with the pandemic. This is with the fact of the loss of the grandma. Let's see how these children are navigating. Let's take a look.
Let's do the magic card.
Magic card against another magic card? How about you, Leon?
My turn!
Oh, excuse me. Joseph's
I'll
turn.
choose my strongest magic card in my whole deck.
Okay.
Do you think about what I told you to think about? What did I tell you again? I don't remember. You don't remember what I told you last night? No. Remember when you're lying down and think of it? I don't think of them. I just fall asleep. You just... Okay!
Okay.
Are you sad about Grandma Helen's death?
Okay.
Did you even get to know Grandma Helen? No. Did you even want to know Grandma Helen? Yes. Well, you should still be sad because she's your grandma. Yes, could be duel already.
Okay. Right now, dueling is important for Joseph.
Yeah, it's my move.
By the way, I'm going to stop you.
Okay. Is that what we're still waiting for?
Okay. So here's the thing, by the way. Children are inviting you into their games. They're inviting you to their own inside story. So I caution my play clinicians. Sometimes when you're playing with a kid, you feel you got to win. Under those circumstances, sometimes I say to my clinicians, I said, maybe you want to think about an alternative profession like plumbing. Now, jokes aside, it's really important to recognize if a child is making up the rules, it doesn't matter, because you're actually viewing what is going on with his challenges. And so by playing his rules, I have a child I'm recently playing with, and he cannot lose. If he even remotely looks or feels like he may lose, he just throws away the game because he can't tolerate that. That's an important message for me to see what's going on the inside of how he is operating. So it's important to respect the game, not worry about so much about the rules. The important piece is you're invited into this special invitation.
Yeah.
Can I ask the question?
Okay.
Ariel,
The next one.
you asked. I'm going to put just a hold for 1 second with the dueling. Just be a real quick question.
Hold, Joseph. Listen to us.
You brought up Grandma Helen to Joseph, and Joseph, how old are you today?
4.5.
4.5. So when you're 4.5, you can be kind of sad, but not really. It's still important to play cards. But you're like what, 9? 10. So I get a feeling that you are feeling about Grandma Helen different than your brother.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What are you feeling?
Sad because when I was 5, Grandma Helen taught me how to read.
Oh, so you remember Grandma Helen very different than Joseph does, huh?
Yeah, because I went to her house in her apartment in Santa Monica.
Yeah.
And like I had a book called and then I
The
read it.
Lonely Dog.
Yeah, and then she corrected me when I make a mistake and teach me like the shortcuts to reading the words. And now like I'm reading big books like Harry Potter.
So you say that Grandma Helen was the first person to really help you read, and now you can read books like Harry Potter because of Grandma Helen.
Yeah.
And she died today. And so that part of your connection with her is really strong, and it sounds like you're really sad. Yeah. And it almost sounds like you kind of wish your brother was as sad as you.
Well, I don't like
Stop for a second. Okay, can you stop? Thank you. So you noticed that the cards started to fall out of her hands. I'm assessing to see, whether or not she might need mental health intervention, which she might. But does she also need occupational therapy or educational therapy, speech and language, which I don't think she falls into that categories at all. And the cards fell out. She dysregulated because I tweaked her. I started to talk about her grandma, and she had a special relationship with her. So you can see what happens from emotional connections. This child, before the age of 10, had an emotional connection with her grandmother, which unfortunately stopped when the grandmother became ill, that was absent for the young man. Because when he was a little boy, when he was an infant, the grandmother became ill, and she was really not part of his life. So you can see the difference from exposure into the community at large and how that impacts development, because it impacts our ability to stay connected to individuals. That's how we develop sense of self. All right. Let's look at the interfering agents besides life experiences necessarily. We mentioned individual neurological differences, and that is to include sound. I said not the necessarily ability to hear, but the way that the brain takes in the auditory message. Let's look at this next slide, this video. This is the first time you're going to see me doing floor time in the clinic setting. I'm working with a young man who is 7.5 chronologically with a moderate form of autism. Now, we follow the lead of the child. He picked a game that was rather simplistic and also tells me that he's a lot younger, because this is the Fisher-Price fishing pole game. It's really a game maybe for 4 or 5-year-olds and not for 7.5-year-olds per se, but okay. So it's telling me that I'm looking at a child who potentially is at least 2.5 years younger than his age. It's a very simple game. It's lovely actually, because it's the fish are on a mechanical track. It's Fisher-Price, and you use fishing poles to pull the fish off of the track as you put everything into motion by pressing a turtle, which has a music box sound. Color coding, turn taking, sharing, all lovely skills to be developed in terms of social context. However, this child turns out to be so aroused by the sudden sound that instead of being a great date, it turns into a very bad date. Let me show you how I turn this very bad date into a great date using floor time. And within the 4-minute film, I want you to notice that I'm going to take a developmental delay that we're identifying now probably by age 4, age 5, to someone who is at least a year plus older in 4 minutes. It's not going to be magic. It's called floor time, and I'll show you how it works. All right. Please.
Ezra, come here. Ezra. No, I won't. No. I'm not going to press the turtle. No way. You know why? That's going to hurt your ears, and you're my friend. I don't want to hurt your ears.
No, you don't press the turtle.
No, but I need help. Come here.
Don't press the turtle.
No, I won't. You can even watch him report us. He's so frightened.
Yeah.
Ezra, come here. I need help. Okay. Now let's take off all the fishies together. Come on. Okay. You are like the bravest guy. Okay, almost. Wait a second. Now I want to show you the trick. Where the music is really a bad thing. Look. So I will. Shh. No. You're going to help me. Because listen. Look at me. I'm never, ever going to make you feel out of control. We're going to do it together. Okay? Yeah. You know what we have to do?
Okay, now he's flapping. Okay, this is overstimulation. It's not a bad thing. He's trying desperately to stay in the game. This is again the self-stimming.
Going with me. Oh, wait a minute, it's coming.
I'll tell you about that in a minute.
You see the screw coming out? You know, Ezra, wait a second. No, I can't do it by myself. Ezra, I can't do it by myself.
Keeping this child engaged with me as much as I can.
Wow. Take them out. 1. Help me. You with me. 1. 1, 2,
And put it in the box.
and
3.
now wait, let's see if it really works. Now here's something very brave.
No, it doesn't.
It does. Give me 5. Wait a second. What did we do? What happened?
It didn't.
And who was the guy in charge?
I did now.
Okay. So we took a child in 4 minutes who presents much, much younger, maybe 3, 4 years old of age. Now, to me, at this very moment in time, he doesn't look like 7.5. He looks more like maybe 5, 6. So in 4 minutes, he went up 2 to 3 years developmentally. How? Well, the first thing I did is I did not remove the toy. I could have said, oh, honey, that toy is stressing you. Let me take that away and find something else. But I didn't because it was important for us to work it together as a team. I did it because I have kids in my practice whose parents, just because they're wonderful parents, they're trying to be efficient and getting them out of the house to school on time and so forth, that they go ahead and they will, these children don't know how to put on their shoes and socks because their parents do it for them. So it was really important for me to go ahead and show this child how to use a screwdriver, how to take away the batteries so that he was empowered, right? And then next time he's encountering something that's going to scare him, and he will, he can do something about it instead of fleeing. That empowering also helps connect this child to me and makes him feel very, very competent. That's the goal when we're talking about a great date. All right. Some of the additional, next please, some of the additional individual neurological issues that interfere with our children include tactile overstimulation. Next please. This is when children are so sensitive to touch that they can't even get a haircut during the day. The parents have to do it in the middle of the night. So here's a cartoon of a parent trying to find the right time where she cuts his child's hair while the child is sleeping and he's snoring away. And the mother finally says, oh gosh, I'm done. And she asks the husband to come in and he says, ready? Okay, take the kid, take the dirty linen, remake the bed, put the sleeping child into the bed. And then with this very lovely, exhausted look on their faces, it says, tomorrow night I'll cut his toenails. Now, I am drawn to this comic so much because to me, it was a turning point in my career. When I was being trained, I was trained typically as the clinician for the children. I was always good with kids. Then there was always a therapist who worked with the family. But the clinicians talked to each other, but we didn't do it all together, and I didn't understand why. So now in my center, we actually have a contractual agreement. My parents are in session with me because we are teaching our parents this gift of how to use this intervention and helping them have a more complete, full life with their children. That's, I believe, part of our strategy that we must do together. We also have to treat these families as a whole. So in my hour-and-a-half sessions, what I do is I spend the first 45 minutes on the floor with the parents and my interns, and we teach the parents how to do this intervention, DIR floor time. Then my interns continue. The child gets an hour-and-a-half of intervention, and I bring these parents, these wonderful parents, into my office, my inner office, and we talk about what's going on for them because they need their own floor time so that they can become whole and complete and feel able then to navigate the world of their child. Additional dilemmas, challenges. Next, please. We have children in terms of individual neurological differences who I mentioned are hyposensitive. These need more impact to know where they are in space and time. So here, next film, please. I have our friend, next, please. Thank you. Who's working with his daddy. Now this is the same friend, if you remember just a moment before, who is hyper-reactive in terms of his auditory processing, and yet hypo, less than, reactive in terms of sensory experiences. He needs a lot of impact to know where he is in space and time. So he's what's called a mixed profile, a bit of both. Hard to present stimulation and appropriate environmental cueing to him. So I have daddy, and I'm teaching daddy, okay, how to go ahead and give his child appropriate squeezes. We're making a squeeze machine so that this child can feel complete. Let's listen in.
That was a big squeeze.
Yeah. Squeeze. Stop.
You gonna squeeze me?
Oh, that's a good idea.
Okay.
Okay.
Squeeze.
Legs or just the top of you? You want your legs too?
Legs.
Okay, ready?
Squeeze.
Ah. Boy, that's a good squeeze.
I can't squeeze anymore.
Oh no!
I have to tell me when to stop.
So what's going on here for this child is that he needs a lot of input. So one of the things that we figured out is that this child needed so much input all day long so that he would be centered in his day. So we went on the internet and found the one-piece footed pajamas that typically you see for toddlers. He loved to wear those even as he got older. So we found them, through adulthood. He would wear it under his clothes. He would wear the Ugg boots so that his flippers wouldn't show. And he would put his clothes on top of his pajama. They were a little bit tight, but he liked that feeling regardless of the temperature during the year. And that's how he navigated and stayed organized. So this is a regulatory solution, right, to what we know is a real sensory issue, but at the same time, we don't want the individual neurological difference to necessarily interfere within the capacity for him to be developmentally appropriate. All right. I mentioned to you next, please, about our children who have difficulty with transition. The motor planning and sequencing is a big issue, going from point A to point B to point C. Probably, next please, probably one of the most difficult times for our children to navigate is at school, and the most difficult time at school is during non-structured periods, because during the classroom, hopefully the teacher has on the board, this is the next steps. Once you get outside for recess, the map is gone. Here we have a young man, and I want you to see what he does and what often our children do on the playground, regardless of the fact that there's all kinds of play equipment, all kinds of friends. Let's see how this gentleman manages to survive literally every day during recess. Stop, thank you. So I went to my friend and I said, do you have friends? And he says, yes, I have a friend. I said, who's your friend? It's my tree. Why would a tree be a child's friend? Because it doesn't move, and he's very anxious, so he likes the fact of that tree's stability. But that's what our children often do in a schoolyard. They either walk the perimeter of the yard or they stand next to a tree, kind of waiting for the 20 minutes or so to be over. And there were kids who came up to him. In fact, one little girl was a soft soul, but she's a kid, so she was kind of shaking him, trying to get him to be connected to her. But the problem was that there were no adults, obvious, because a lot of times teachers take their breaks during that time. So one of the things that I really advocate, and what I've seen in different states, Wisconsin and Minnesota, for example, have recess coaches, which I really love, because when there are individuals who come out and help navigate that for our children, they can thrive. But they need someone who gives them a direction. You need to do this, and this, and this, because without supervision and intervention, they don't, and that adult relationship, they freeze. They hang out with trees. Our goal, next please, is that we need to be the drivers of our children's development. So it is our relationship with children that need to help them socialize and be aware of their sensory experiences, how to attend to the world around them, to communicate more effectively, to think more clearly, to regulate the world around them, and to motor plan more cohesively. But we also have to be available not only to our children, but also we have to make ourselves aware to our parents. In this next piece, you're going to be seeing, next please, a mom and a child as they navigate their own relationship. This is a mommy, When I see, next please, thank you. When I see a mom and a child working together, I look to see what's going on, because really I have the child coming in as the patient, but I also have the patient in my parent. The adult part of the parent comes in, of course, but then the baby part of that parent also joins us. That's the part which is tired because they've been up with their child for so many hours and days. That's the part that they doesn't want them to be rejected because they are so frustrated because their child sometimes wants to flee away from them. I want you to watch what happens in this short interaction and how I have to explain to mom what's going on in the context of their interaction, and inadvertently mom is pushing that child away without even realizing it. Okay, take a look.
I'm gonna break and run.
Okay, let go and calm down a little. I will be happy to give you a break. Do you think we should have a little snack?
No. I want to make a break inside.
That's fine. I'm happy to do that if you can talk like a man. You can stop screaming and moving and bouncing. Okay, look at me. Look at me. Yoo-hoo!
So here's our piece. Here we have this wonderful mommy, and she's holding her child very tightly. This is a child who also needs a lot of input because, if you remember, he's hypo-regulated. Okay, so that's fine. But the problem is he also has auditory processing distortions. Mom doesn't realize that. When mom is holding him so tight and he begins to wiggle, then her child part begins to peek out. And she's feeling that potential rejection as that child's going to flee from her. So she holds him even tighter. And then she actually says, in a very high-pitched voice, "Yoo-hoo, come, pay attention to me." The problem is this child cannot handle the sudden yoo-hoo, startled, and it has a startled response. And then he wants to really get away from the parent. So part of our work is also to educate our families to the underlying neurological issues of our kiddos, to let them understand that the child is not fleeing away from you, mommy. The child is fleeing away from the noise which hurts his ears, and to sensitize that parent for her future actions with that child. We're going to go now and do a short floor time session before the end of our sessions, and I really thank everybody for sticking with us today despite all the technical challenges. I think we're doing actually pretty well. Next, please. In terms of the strategies with floor time, next, please. Next, please. We're going to look at the basic principles of floor time. Next. The principles of floor time include following the child's lead. That means joining the child. No, go back, go back, go back. Go back, please. Could you go back, please? Thank you so much. To joining the, oops, almost. We're going to go back to, it says basic principles of floor time. One more. One more, please. Thank you. Just right there. Perfect. Thank you so much. Means follow the child's lead, means joining in on the child's developmental level and building on the germ of his idea, whatever that is. Our gift is to take that germ of an idea and expand on it so it becomes a back and forth interaction. We have opening and closing circles of communication. That's that psychic ping pong game we talked about. To maintain it, we have to create a play environment that allows us to expand these back and forth circles of communication, and consequently we broaden the child's range of interactive experience. But to do so, we have to tailor it to the child's underlying individual neurological differences so he can stay put in the interaction. And by doing that, he's learning, and so simultaneously he's mobilizing the 6 functional developmental levels. Because I'm a visual learner, I'm going to show you how we take these principles into an actual session. Next, please. I'm going to spend the last 5 minutes of our talk today to show you a short film. This little boy is 3.5 chronologically. Developmentally, he's a lot younger. He has very poor expressive language, more like a 15-month-old. He's receptive language is pretty good. He understands most everything. But his play is very stilted. He only likes to play with cars. He calls them go-go's, and he goes from thing to thing to thing. He has a moderate form of autism and a comorbid diagnosis of pretty severe attention deficit. He wasn't supposed to play for more than moments at a time. We got him to play for a good hour and a half. We're going to take a small snippet right now and show you how I'm on the floor with this child. playing, keeping him in the interaction, not taking no for an answer, and making sure, because of our interaction, that through the power of play and the power of DIR floor time, that child's brain is improving and handling developmental delays at a much more rapid and thorough pace.
Ding, ding, ding. Come on, cars. Kale's telling everybody to pay attention. Okay, okay. We're ready. Ding, ding, ding. Come on, Lion. Come on, Kale wants to play with us. Come on, fire trucks. Everybody, let's go. Kale's ringing the bell. Let's go.
Nonverbal bell, and I am responding to
Anybody else
all
coming?
the other animals out and making it
I
all
want
the
to
little
come.
kitties in my
I
trailer
want to
and
come.
making
Don't
it
forget
as a
me. I
successful
want to come.
experience. He got a little distracted by one of the toys, and now I'm going to do a social intervention. I follow the lead, but I'm not going to let him, dangle a toy. I'm going to start doing that kind of cartoony voice. Don't hold me in a bad way, because I want to feel good about my playing with you.
Hey, Fillmore. Hi. This is my friend Kale. He's ringing the bell. Do you want to play with us too?
Hold it. Play. I'm in it.
Ding,
I'm not
the bell?
narrating it. I'm actually one of the characters.
Whoa, let's
for you
play.
to know all the children's characters so that you can be active in the child's imagination. And again, the bell is actually the communication. But then he says something, he gets distracted very easily, and the bell starts to not function.
Bring some tools. Come here.
And his language is poor.
Let's fix it. Later.
So now we have to continue to
Can you help us, please? Come on, Fillmore.
draw the child
Guys,
interactive.
let's fix this.
And bringing out
Let's get some
10 tools to fix the bell.
We have to
That
fix the
leads to
bell.
further interaction.
Okay. Well, that's a good tool. Oh. Okay, I have this tool. What should I do with this? Well, I want it. I want it. Will you help me? Ooh,
Grab it
that's
from my
a
hand,
good one.
and I'm going to go like another video. So again, I'm doing all kinds of simultaneously functioning 6 functional developmental levels. I'm increasing the ability to understand that there's a person who's
bell.
I'm never letting him go out of the direction.
I'm going to fix the bell this way.
Making sure to tailor my interaction. I'm listening the whole time.
Boy, I like when we're
everything is
Kale.
and emphasizing.
Hey, over here.
Oftentimes going to isolation.
Some oil.
Easy, but
Put some oil on.
issues. But I'm saying I'm here.
Go.
I'm
Here's some
supporting
oil.
my neurological issues, and I'm going to make sure that we can do this
Very
together
good.
as a team.
Here's. Hold on, I got some more. Oh, here's another saw. Oh, I got it. Here's the wrench. Okay, what are you gonna do with that one? Okay, I'll help you. We'll do it together. Oh no, come on, let's do it together. Yeah. Ready?
So notice I'm not letting him get out of that interaction for
2,
one moment.
3. Oh.
We can play together.
Oh my gosh. Whoa. Where should we put it? Where should we put it?
Let's pull it down.
You can put it down? Okay, I'll put it down. Here we go. Whew, that was heavy. Give me 5 for helping.
That interaction.
Wow, okay. All right.
Okay.
Oh, it's so big. Wait a minute. I want
Oh my gosh.
Oh,
but I'm showing mommy what I'm looking for. Watch what I'm doing with this moment. I'm taking that toy.
Is that a silly place? Yeah. Oh my gosh. Dr. Hess, put that bell off your head.
But I want him to have that good eye contact. Let's put a hold right now. Thank you so much. Okay, we're going to stop the tape right now just because of the time constraints. But I want you just to notice that, for example, I wear flowers in my hair. I discovered them in Hawaii and I happen to like the look. But besides that, the method to the madness, we also know from previous MRI studies that when children, in fact, there's a study out of Israel from, from 2007, it's an older study that showed that when children on the spectrum were going ahead and looking at the eyes of individuals from here on up, they began to have an overexcited amygdala, which is the emotional center of the brain. That's why, for example, when I wear a mask in the center because of the pandemic, my masks are clear so they can see my face. It's very important because this is where children on the spectrum tend to focus from the nose bridge down. The one reason I wear flowers because I try, or funny hats or a toy on my head, is because I want to try to get these children to look up in a more normative space, not so they're going to be frightened, but because this is, the eyes is where basically is our entrance into the soul, as they say, and it is the way that we generally socially interact. So I want to get my children comfortable with that space without alarming them. I'm going to stop now, knowing that we still have
Hello? All right. I think our time came to an end, and I'm very sorry for this abrupt ending. But do you still have questions that I should forward to Dr. Hess? I'm very sorry about the technical issues at the beginning, but if you have still questions, I can forward them to her. If not, I'm very glad and thank you for your attention and joining in for today's SEPI talk, treating children impacted by autism using DIR, Floortime, developmental individual difference and relationship-based approach, presented by Esther Hess and featured by SEPI. I wish you all a very nice rest of the day, depending on wherever you are, and hope you enjoyed our talk today, and hopefully see you soon again on our next SEPI webinar.